with so much noise around us regarding our fractured, broken world with all its factions, diverse tribes, debates about debates, and never-ending division, and dare I say, confusion, we should never undervalue any opportunity to listen for what God is saying to us through these sacred scriptures. These sacred scriptures which declare Jesus is Lord. And where faith in Jesus as Lord is regularly displayed. Today's gospel includes two stories for us about faith, each with a strong connection to our lesson from Lamentations, and both revealing an element of faith. Now, we haven't seen this earlier in Mark's gospel. These particularly are stories of waiting for healing, waiting with deep sorrow, but with great faith and great hope. We see this in the woman who had been suffering from this chronic medical condition, and also from Jairus, the synagogue leader whose daughter was dying. Now, for the woman, we're not entirely certain what her medical condition was. The text says a hemorrhage, but it is revealed that her illness very definitely determined her life in the community and her relationship with other people. Because of this hemorrhaging, she was ritually and then chronically unclean. She was an outcast. She was not to be around, not to be touched. Just touching her would make you unclean too. So here's a woman who has suffered greatly for 12 years, but who persisted in her hope and kept seeking anyone who could relieve her suffering. It's a beautiful and very touching scene. One that reveals, once again, not only Jesus' good heart, but a power of Jesus that, when linked with faith, comes out of Jesus even when he's not intentionally releasing it. So this is a little different from what we have previously seen when Jesus heals others. Now, in the woman's case, this is not magic. It's not where the woman touches Jesus' robe and it's like some kind of divine bandage and her blood flow miraculously stops. Rather, it is a woman suffering and waiting and hoping and then bringing her faith to Jesus, believing that she will be healed just by touching his robe. And it happened. This then is an early indicator in Mark's gospel of how much faith plays a role in healing. And this is not unlike Jairus as well, who had an equally demonstrable faith. I mean, Jesus, like the woman, believed that Jesus could heal his daughter. But Jairus' desire for healing came, as we read, with a kind of even greater urgency than the woman who'd been living with this for a long time. It was more urgent with Jairus because his daughter was gravely ill and with likely very little time left. So when Jesus took the time to respond and heal the woman who in good faith touched his cloak, what happens is that other people arrive from Jairus' home and share the bad news. It's too late. His daughter has died. She didn't make it. She couldn't hang on long enough. If only Jesus could have gotten there earlier. Now we get how Jairus felt. We get that with emotions whipped up like the windstorm in last week's gospel. Except in this case, the emotional sails of Jairus were completely ripped apart, and he was now crashing into the rocks of grief. To this, Jesus says, just like he did with the disciples in the storm, and who were with with Jesus in the boat earlier, Jesus simply said, here we hear it again, do not fear, only believe. Now, we don't know if that calmed Jairus down or not. The text doesn't say. I mean, did Jesus mean that his baby girl was now in God's hands? So he should not be afraid because she's now in heaven? Or that his grief would soon go away? Did Jesus mean that we should go on even in tragedy when something like this happens? Now, we don't know. But we do know that Jesus was also soon met by a storm of other people who would not be calmed. So when Jesus arrives at the house, our lesson says that they were weeping and wailing, probably a lot of them. And that's because Jairus was a leader of the synagogue. So we can imagine that his whole congregation would be right there, supporting them, praying for them, and together now in their grief. Weeping and wailing as was the custom. But then something startling happens. To the crowd, Jesus says something that if it was said by any other compassionate, well-trained caregivers or pastoral care persons, would be only received as cruel and insensitive. That's when Jesus says, "Why are you making all this fuss? What's this crying about? She's not dead, but sleeping." Try walking into a hospice care center right after a loved one has died and say to the family, "Hey, what's all this crying about?" So when Jesus says this to the mourners, claiming that the child is not dead but asleep, it's not surprising that they rather scornfully laugh at Jesus. What a ridiculous, insensitive thing to say. How dare Jesus say such a thing? He should not even be here. It's too late. But, as we read, they defer to the family, and they enter the family, and Jesus enters the dead girl's room. Now, did you know that one of our wonderful, beautiful stained glass windows right here at St. Paul's depicts this very moment? Some of you may know that. You've seen all these windows before, but you might not have noticed lately. But we have a window that depicts this very moment. It's the one at the back over there. And be sure to take a look at it now if you can see it or as you walk out. It captures that moment when Jesus comes into the room, like a snapshot. But no matter how well we capture that moment in words, paintings, or stained glass, we will never be able to convey what it must have been like to experience the miracle, this miracle, which was so unlike what anyone had seen before. Talitha cum, Jesus says, it's time to get up now, dear one. And for those who were around Jesus, it was a time to discover more deeply the wonder of how the God of all creation has entered into a broken human world where there is pain and suffering and people die, and make clear God's intention is to heal brokenness and make all things well. These stories reveal this about God through Jesus. So, now I need to pause for a moment. Not because the sermon is ended, but pause for a moment to be reminded again of what we all bring to the hearing of these stories. As I began this morning, I acknowledge that we come to these readings and this time of worship with a host of things that are happening all around us. They're not all the same things, but there's a host of all kinds of things that are happening all around us. You remember how I began it? I said, with so much noise around us regarding this fractured, broken world with all its factions, diverse tribes, debates about debates, and never-ending division, dare I say confusion, we should never undervalue any opportunity to listen for what God is saying to us through these sacred scriptures which affirm Jesus is Lord. Now, at that point at the beginning, I could have added a long, long list of what comprises the noise and the divisions and the fractures and the pain and the loss and the fears and the troubles and the hurts and the distress and the confusion all around us. But you know this already. You're already feeling it, to some or a great degree. Whether you're lamenting these days the state of the world, or the nation, or your family, or work, or you're dealing with a health concern for yourself or someone you love. Maybe someone you love has just died. Or you're coming up on another holiday and you are remembering this deceased loved one and you still miss them so much. So what I'm saying here is that as we listen for what God may be saying to us, we bring a lot with us. Now maybe like the woman in our story, you've been carrying hard things around for a long time, or perhaps like Jairus, perhaps something hurtful or tragic has just happened in your life. Or maybe you're just so sick of all the noise and anger everywhere these days that you just wonder how long, oh God. And this is precisely why, as people of faith, we consciously choose to immerse ourselves in these sacred scriptures. And this is also what sets us apart from those who deal with the same kinds of troubles, but without faith. Faith informs how we look at everything. Jesus informs how we look at everything. So when we then absorb these stories of how Jesus healed this woman with a hemorrhage or Jairus' little girl who died, what we connect with is the faith. Not just their faith, but the faith, our faith in Jesus. And this faith is what takes us much deeper than simply witnessing this story from long ago of a physical healing or healings. Now today, in prayer, faithfully in prayer, like as we bring faith to our own lives like they did in the scriptures, whenever we experience healing, whether it's a physical, emotional, or spiritual, we will rejoice. And we do rejoice. I mean, I know that some of you here, or some of you are worshiping with us online who have actually been at death's door, and thanks be to God, you are still with us. But I also know, for some, when they hear the words of Jesus, it's time to get up, it will be at their resurrection, in heaven with Jesus. And where the next invitation of Jesus, let's get something to eat, will be from the heavenly banquet. But in all this, our focus will be and must be on Jesus and the faith that Jesus offers us as we put our trust in Him. And that's how we are so overjoyed to discover Jesus as we get into these scriptures, as we dive deeply into them, as we get immersed in them, as we look for ways that God is talking to us through Jesus and through these stories, showing so many things, like particularly looking even here today that no one is beyond Jesus' love and mercy. No one is outcast. No one is unclean or unwelcome in the kingdom of God. And furthermore, that death is never the final word. Our faith rooted in the Bible constantly reminds us of this, that nothing will keep us from God. And because of this, that's why nothing can keep us from God, and that's why we can live and keep living in this broken world with a faith that is finally deeper, fuller, stronger than whatever would keep us from God and each other. And I know this is a bold claim, but I also know what other people of faith have discovered throughout the centuries. That as we trust in Jesus, as we keep rooted in these sacred scriptures, as we walk in faith with Jesus and with each other, we will discover all the time that this is real and this is true. And it does not shut off the noise. I wish it did. It does not shut off the noise. But it does add something really important. But you got to pay attention to it. What is added amidst the noise, surrounded by the noise, are some wonderful, sweet melodies that penetrate through them, through that noise. Some wonderful, sweet melodies that draw us together and bring us together with beautiful and faithful harmony. Thanks be to God. Amen.